Great. Yeah, and I do pause periodically throughout the talk to give people a chance to ask any clarifying questions about what I've talked about previously too. So don't feel intimidated or bashful about unmuting yourself and asking questions. I'm happy to do it. I want everybody to get out of the presentation what they were hoping to get. Gut health is a very broad topic. There's a lot of things that I'm going to touch on, including nutrition, diets, microbiome, particular issues that we tend to see in clinical practice, which shows us how common digestive issues are in the United States.
So Lily, before you get started, I would like to do an official intro again, since we're recording now. So thanks everybody for joining us. We are greatly appreciative of Lily, who is our head herbologist at Avon Herbs, and she is going to be presenting today on gut health. And my name is Darlene, and I am the program manager here at Cancer Support Community. So thank you, Lily, for sharing your expertise with us today.
For sure. I'll say that other bit again so that we can edit the recording. Yeah, so gut health is a very broad topic. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things, giving some broad brushstrokes since we only have an hour. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer what I can here. And I also have handouts that I can email Darlene for her to give them to folks on a variety of topics. I did send one, which is getting off proton pump inhibitors, which are a kind of over-the-counter medication that a lot of people take when they have digestive issues for acid reflux and things like that, but they are very harmful in the long term, which most people do not know. So we're going to go over a lot of different topics. And again, if you need any more granular information, I'm happy to do that. You can always reach me at lily@havenherbs.com. To answer any questions you may have. But getting right into it, Americans have digestive issues for sure. 43% of Americans have gone onto a diet for weight loss as some sort of health goal, and 50% of American women do that. And this may be the first time you have ever heard this message, but weight loss is not a health goal. And I know that some of you have heard this even from a doctor, that you need to lose weight for X, Y, or Z reason. But we're going to get into the actual science of why that's not really true. And BMI is an elaborate fiction, which is body mass index. And as a result of a lot of body hatred and weight loss desire, there's a lot of fad diets out there that do more harm than good. And we'll talk about some of those as well as the microbiome, so gut flora. We'll talk about the HPA axis a little bit, which means that your gut is sort of connected to your endocrine system and your brain and your nervous system, and how gut imbalances can cause depression or anxiety. We'll talk a little bit about different kinds of issues that people have: acid reflux, GERD, gallbladder issues. I see a lot of people in my personal practice as an herbalist who have digestive issues. And a lot of times I wish they had come to me sooner, because they've already had like a gallbladder removal, for example. We can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so I mentioned some of these things. Some of them are serious and some of them are less serious, but they all indicate some sort of imbalance. Even bad breath. The two main causes of bad breath are problems within the mouth itself, bacterial buildup, gingivitis, things like that, or food that's not properly digesting in the gut, which is a problem. Not just bad breath is a symptom of that. It's not like something that you tackle on its own, but you need to make sure that you're digesting food properly so you're getting nutrient absorption and you're getting, other things that can go wrong in the digestive system impact your immune system, they impact your endocrine system and your nervous system. So bad breath is an indicator that something is not quite right. So we need to take a look at that. Diarrhea and constipation, I put them on the same line because they're just two sides of the same coin of improper digestion and your small and large intestine not necessarily doing their work. Gallbladder attacks and gallstones are a common problem in the United States, as is acid reflux, and its much more dangerous cousin GERD. Unchecked GERD, where you have just constant acid coming up into your throat, can cause scarring and eventually cancer. And gas and bloating, you're not meant to feel yucky every time your body is doing digestion. And chronic gas and bloating, we all get it sometimes, but chronic gas and bloating, like every day in between meals or after meals, is an indicator that something is not quite right. Let's advance. So Americans spend $10 billion a year on different digestive supplements, and some of them are, over-the-counter drugs like Zantac and Prilosec, and some of them are, like, oh, I'm going to get this digestive tea because I don't feel good. But the most commonly prescribed drug in America are proton pump inhibitors, like the ones that you see on the screen. We spend $11 billion a year on these drugs, and they are never meant to be taken in the long term. I have seen so many clients where they've been taking them and their doctor recommended just popping one every day, because the way that they work is they're supposedly preventative, where you take one a day and it keeps you from getting that acid reflux problem. But if you take them one a day in the long term, it actually causes serious liver problems. So they're not really meant for the long term, and doctors don't always advise people of that. And so people will assume that because their doctor told them, oh yeah, just take one of those, that they can take them for long periods of time. And a lot of times people come see me and they stop working after a while. And they're like, not even that works. And I'm like, how long have you taken that? And they're like, 3 years. And I was like, so we're gonna, the handout that I have actually gives some detailed information about how to kick PPIs to the curb, so that you can use your own biological functions and support those to get back to an acid balance and a digestion that actually works for you. Yeah, next slide. One problem that you've probably heard about recently, especially if you follow I don't know what that was. Follow natural health circles, is leaky gut syndrome. And what this is small holes in the small intestine where the chyme, which is the liquefied food that has, been churned up in the stomach and enters the small intestine for nutrient absorption, instead of being in there and breaking down, it's leaking out into the body cavity, and it causes all kinds of problems because your immune system all of a sudden has to go on hyper alert to get all these foreign bodies where they're supposed to be contained within the small intestine, but they're everywhere. And so it causes immune imbalance, and then it starts causing endocrine imbalance because your whole body is trying to fight this problem. And a lot of leaky gut can be caused by some of the chemicals that are in the industrial food system. One of the most common chemicals that causes leaky gut is glyphosate, which is an herbicide. A lot of people know it as Roundup, like they use it in their yards or whatever, or in the cracks of the sidewalk, because they just don't like those pesky weeds. Well, the weeds aren't going to hurt you, but the glyphosate definitely will. And unfortunately, glyphosate is used on commercial wheat a few days before harvesting because it makes it really easy for the combine to come through and chop down that wheat. It's not as difficult to harvest because it starts desiccating the wheat. Well, there's no getting that glyphosate off that wheat. Even if they did bother to try, like washing the wheat, which they don't, it wouldn't come out. It's absorbed into the plant cell walls. And so what ends up happening is commercial wheat, commercial sort of GMO laden, non-organic signified wheat, which is in a lot of our food products that are processed, contains glyphosate. And they've done some studies on crackers and breakfast cereals and even just plain Quaker oats, right? And they all contain levels of glyphosate, and it's building up in our systems, and it causes tissue to decay. And so what you end up with is things like leaky gut syndrome, or you end up with autoimmune diseases, because those chemicals not only are carcinogenic, but they're also endocrine disrupting, and they just start a cascade of problems. So what do we do about that, right? Well, number one, we have to work on some advocacy on problems that are bigger than just our individual choices, right? In other countries, we've banned glyphosate, but in the United States, they have not yet. So that's one thing. Second thing is being a well-informed consumer and making individual choices, because you can't control necessarily policy of, you know, the USDA or federal government entities, but you can control what you bring into your house. And so making sure that any kind of baked good or anything that contains wheat at all has an organic signifier to it, because then they can't use glyphosate. If you just buy breakfast cereal or Ritz crackers or whatever, and they're not labeled as organic, you're getting glyphosate for sure. So there's that issue. It causes a lot of problems in American digestion. Any questions so far? It's so quiet. All right.
How would you know, if you had leaky gut, like what are the symptoms, or do they just go along with everything else that we have problems with?
Yeah, so if you feel like you have digestive issues, you have diarrhea, constipation, gas and bloating, you have pain in your abdomen, and then you also have a lot of symptoms that maybe you don't equate with digestion issues, like brain fog or extreme fatigue. There's a possibility that it's leaky gut as the root cause. There are other root causes for that, and you would want to work with a practitioner, someone holistic, to get at the root of your problems. There, you know, when I see people, there's a really long intake form, and I ask a lot of questions, and then we do like an interview back and forth where I ask follow-up questions to the answers that they gave. And so we try and get down to the root of the problem. And sometimes it takes a minute to get to that root cause. Sometimes, you know, I'll be working with someone and it could be 2 or 3 different things. And so we try and do a process of elimination through treatment to see, okay, is this one working? Let's check in after a month. Is this one working? Until we get to addressing the actual root cause while we're trying to ameliorate the symptoms.
I have a question. So taking Prevacid 2 or 3 times a month wouldn't be that much of a problem. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying taking it on an ongoing basis is a problem. So
Okay.
2 or 3 times a month, but 2 or 3 times a month every month for years, that is a problem. Yeah, it's but the thing about Prevacid is that the way that they recommend you take it is that you take it every day to prevent problems.
Okay.
Rather
Well, they
than
want to sell more product that way.
Yeah, for sure. But it's not, so it's what we call a preventative rather than a remedy. So like
Okay.
when you have pain or inflammation, you take an ibuprofen, and that's a remedy because it relieves pain and inflammation. Whereas what PPIs do is they work on inhibiting a process, but the inhibition only happens if that chemical stays in your body over a prolonged period. So it's not a remedy. You know, people kind of equate them with a more convenient form of antacid tablet, but antacid tablets are a remedy. You take them when you have acid reflux, and it's alkaline and it counter affects the acid. But PPIs are not remedies.
So take an antacid instead then.
You can do that, or there's
Yeah.
other things that we'll talk about for sure.
Okay.
A little bit later on in the slideshow.
I have a question, and is your talk going to also address diverticulitis and irritable bowel? Are those related to this gut health?
Yeah, for sure. And I do have some handouts on diverticulitis that I can send to Darlene. Diverticulitis, for those that don't know, are inflammation and possible infection of the diverticula, which are these little folds inside the small intestine. It's very painful, especially if they get infected. And there are herbal protocols for diverticulitis that you can take. And there are certain foods that seem to upset people who are prone to diverticulitis that you can avoid. Seeds, little tiny things, for example, that you can do. And then, yeah, we will talk about IBS, which is sort of an umbrella for a lot of different things, as well as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and things like that. We'll definitely talk about those. All right, next slide. GERD. Okay, so GERD is basically chronic acid reflux, and it is prevalent. It's more prevalent in North America because of the food that we eat than it is in, say, East Asia. If you look at the percentages there, you've got less than 10% in East Asia, but you've got double digits. And these were earlier statistics. You can see like 2000, 2001. It's increased since then. I'll have to update my slideshow to talk about where it's been in this last decade, but it has increased. But in 2000, 22% of primary care visits to doctors were in some way related to GERD. And that's huge. Right? People are going to the doctor, and people don't like to go to the doctor. So when they go to the doctor, it's because they really have an issue that needs dealt with. And we've seen a 46% increase in these GERD related issues. And a lot of it has to do with the way Americans eat, not just how we are constantly eating on the run and not giving ourselves time to digest. We live in a world where everything's really quick, although, with COVID, things have slowed down a little bit. And maybe people are starting to slow down and eat better, but you need to give yourself time to process food and to digest food. And if you're constantly grabbing something on the run and eating as you drive or eating as you're, at your desk or whatever, that's not good for you. And if you are eating on the run and eating at your desk, chances are the things that you're eating are convenience foods, and they are not whole food that is nutritious. So, what we eat and how we eat in the United States is definitely contributing to chronic problems like GERD. Next slide. Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So these are autoimmune diseases. And so what autoimmune disease means is that your endocrine system is going nutty and causing your immune system to attack some part of your own body and see it as some sort of foreign substance, because the immune system is there to attack pathogens and make sure that we don't get sick. But if it's sent the wrong signals by the endocrine system, it starts attacking your own body. And there are different kinds of autoimmune diseases. There is psoriasis, and your skin is being attacked. There's rheumatoid arthritis, where your joints are being attacked. And there's Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, where either your stomach or your intestines are being attacked. And these are inflammatory bowel diseases. They're incredibly painful. They are triggered by specific kinds of food. Most people know that, like, with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, gluten is a huge issue for folks. If they ingest any kind of gluten, which is a protein, that it flares up their digestive tract and is incredibly painful. I have an herbalist friend who has Crohn's disease, and when she gets glutened, like if she eats out and they're not very careful about her food, she will bleed for weeks. It is terrible and it's very painful and it's distressing. So I have talked with a lot of holistic practitioners about these types of diseases, and honestly, there is a gluten protein allergy, but it is exacerbated by the things that we talked about earlier, the glyphosate and the chemicals that are being used on grain crops here in the United States. So these particular issues, these autoimmune issues, modern biochemical medicine, the kind that you get insurance for, doesn't have a cure necessarily for any kind of autoimmune disease. They put people on immunosuppressant drugs, meaning they suppress their immune system, which causes less attacking of the body, but it's a masking of the problem. It hasn't addressed the reason why the body is attacking itself. It's not a normal set of circumstances, right? And I think part of it is that a lot of it is currently beyond our control in the United States. There is so much out there in the water, in the soil, in the air, in our food supply, that there's only so much amelioration we can do. So stopping our bodies from freaking out that we're filling ourselves with poison is the main approach. When I work with folks with autoimmune disease, we work first on a detoxing program, and I'm not talking about necessarily detoxing their body. I'm talking about detoxing their home. And I've had classes with cancer support community on this, their body care, your cleaning supplies, things like that. You need to remove all of those from your home because frankly, indoor air is worse than outdoor air in the United States because of all the chemicals that we bring into our homes. And then we work on dietary, lifestyle, and supplementation to help restore that balance. It's a longer process with autoimmune because it is an endocrine issue, and you definitely need to be gradual when you're dealing with your own endocrine system. But I have worked with many people with autoimmune disease and gotten them to a manageable state where they aren't experiencing their adverse symptoms and they feel like most of it has been reversed and their immune system is no longer in that position. But it's really challenging because it requires lifestyle changes. And those are the hardest things. I'll tell you, as a practitioner, it would be great if I could just give somebody a bottle of something and fix all their problems. But because I'm a holistic practitioner, I know that that is not really how it works. And we have to work on lifestyle and diet and all the hard things that require daily commitments. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide.
We have a question. What is the difference between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis?
It's where the body is attacking. Crohn's is about the stomach and the small intestine, and ulcerative colitis is the small and large intestine. That's it. All autoimmune disease is really the same thing, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis or Crohn's. It's just the body is being attacked in different places.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the gallbladder. I have worked with so many people that have just gotten it removed because they're having gallbladder attacks or they're, repeatedly getting gallstones. And when you get to that point, it becomes this crisis, this acute problem. And when it gets to that point, modern biochemical medicine, the only thing they can really do is to cut it out. And you can live without a gallbladder, right? It's not optimal. Many people don't even know what the gallbladder does. So it works in conjunction with the liver. The liver produces bile that breaks down fats in the body that you ingest. If you're having bacon for breakfast, your liver is a good friend to create bile. And then your gallbladder's job is to release that bile periodically into the stomach so that it can mix with enzymes and all sorts of things to break down those fats. The American diet is a lot fattier than most diets out there. And so we really make our livers and gallbladders work really hard. And so what ends up happening is the gallbladder starts freaking out if there's too much fat in the diet, or the bile isn't being produced regularly, because it's just a hollow organ. All it does is spit bile out. So really, it's an issue of how the gallbladder is working with the rest of your digestive system. I work with folks that are starting to experience digestive issues, and if we get it early enough, we can reverse this problem and not have to deal with surgery. But if it goes on too long and they don't see me until like we're having attacks, it's harder to not opt for that surgery because there is pain involved. So cholesterol is an issue with American diets, and that tends to lead to gallbladder issues. I apologize for the next slide. It's kind of gross.
Lily, I have a question. This is Portia.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you're talking about gallstones. Are kidney stones in any way a factor in there, or any kind of correlation?
So the kidneys are part of the urinary system, and usually kidney stones are calcifications, and that usually has to do with calcium absorption in the body and imbalances of minerals, so potassium, calcium.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's a slightly different problem than these gallstones. They also feel terrible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let's scroll past the gallstones. I don't like looking at them. Okay. So what's not a problem? I've outlined a few things that are obviously problems, but let's talk about obesity, BMI, and all of that, because there are multi-million-dollar industries out there designed to make you feel crappy about your body and to make you buy stuff and do stuff that it's an invented problem. So BMI is body mass index, and what it does is it's supposed to take your ratio of how much fat is in your body. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give you a ratio of muscle to fat, right? And it doesn't measure how much fat is subcutaneous, which is extra fat, versus fat that surrounds all of your organs, the necessary fat that you need to survive. It also doesn't take into account your body frame. It doesn't take into account your ethnicity. Some ethnicities have larger amounts of fat as a standard body type. Your genetics, it doesn't tell you if you're actually healthy or not. It doesn't measure actual indicators of health like blood sugar or cholesterol or blood pressure. Those are actual metrics that you can use to determine if someone is healthy, and often they are completely separated from BMI. By saying all fat people are unhealthy, you're saying all skinny people are healthy, and we absolutely know that that's not true. So obesity is defined as BMI of 30 or higher. And I know so many fat athletes, it's ridiculous. They're way healthier than I am. Being fat is really not a health issue. The health issue is that, number one, often doctors won't even listen to people who are having health issues or pain or concerns about their health. And the first thing that a doctor will say is, well, you need to lose weight. And it really becomes this obstacle to getting actual treatment. People die. Fat people die because they aren't given proper medical treatment. The problem is social stigma and a lack of education. Doctors, when they go to medical school, they only get a semester of nutrition and they're fed information. But if people are interested in this issue, I can definitely send on some excerpts from a fantastic book that is by a doctor, an MD. Her name is Linda Bacon, and the book is called Health at Every Size. And it goes through all the studies on obesity and BMI, and it breaks them down so that you actually can see that the science does not bear out that BMI is an indicator of health, that obesity is a problem. The primary problems are people not getting good food. They eat heavily processed food, mostly like refined sugars. They have a ton of grain in their diet that is processed with chemicals, and they're not getting proper movement. The modern era has meant that people sit for their job. They sit and they don't move around, and our bodies are meant to move. Like a lot of the biological functions that keep us healthy, circulation and bone density, they rely on us moving. So that is the problem, not necessarily BMI or obesity. Next slide.
Lily, we do have a question in the chat. What's an alternative treatment to flush sludge and gallstones from the gallbladder? Asymptomatic right now, but don't like to go under the knife if it leads to it.
Yeah. There are definitely some herbs that we can talk about. I'm going to be talking about bitter therapy towards the end of the slideshow. So definitely pay attention when we get to bitters.
Okay, thank you. And then the next, I think is a comment, BMI is not conclusive to obesity. I think it's more on presence of fat in tissues like abdominal fat.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So just to put another nail in the coffin, the weight loss industry, and it is an industry, includes books and foods like prepared foods and subscription plans and supplements. And they reinforce other industries like fashion industry, magazine industry, things like that. They're trying to make money off of you, and it's unfortunate, but we've seen lots of industries that should not be for profit, whether it's healthcare, pharmaceuticals, or diet and things like that, be profitized in our current system. And it makes it really hard to know what's fact and what's fiction. I always say, follow the money, right? What does a person have as a personal vested interest in giving you this information? Are they trying to sell you something? Right? Go to someone who just wants to educate and not necessarily sell you something to get your info. Like I said, the Linda Bacon book has been out for about a decade. She periodically revises it, and I can send you some excerpts. I think it's fantastic. And it's not common knowledge, even with, educated folks like doctors. Next.
And then I got on mute. Yeah. Lily, can you please address the keto craze?
Yes, I will. It's coming up.
Oh, there we go.
Ta-da! Yeah, so the keto diet is where you eat a lot of animal products, saturated fats, things like that. Not a lot of carbs. So it's mostly what you're eating is vegetable matter, and only certain ones, and meat or eggs or dairy. It is not a healthy diet. People turn to it specifically for weight loss, which, as I said before, is not a health goal. The keto diet was invented by a doctor. Again, doctors have a semester of nutrition, and it was invented for people with seizure disorders. People who have epilepsy or other types of seizure disorders need a lot more fat for brain functioning than most folks do. And so it was designed to help people with seizures disorders, which it does. However, when people are on this diet, they're on it for a while, then they go off it, then they go back on it. It's not a lifetime commitment. It's not a long-term thing. It helps in periods of crisis with the neurological system. But it is unhealthy. Your cholesterol will go up. most of the weight loss that happens at first, of course, is water weight. And then you get, you go into what's called ketosis, which is a mild form of ketoacidosis, which is a health crisis for diabetics. My partner is diabetic, and when we were first diagnosed, he went into the emergency room, and thank goodness they took a blood draw because he had an infection that was lingering and they needed to extract it. But they took a blood test and they admitted him to the hospital. He was in ketoacidosis, and they told him his blood sugar was so high that he probably should have been in a coma. Yeah. So it was super scary, and they made him not eat for an entire weekend, which, let me tell you, is very cranky making. So he was in the hospital not eating for an entire weekend and fasting. And then when they first let him out, you know, the first thing they let him eat was an English muffin, not keto. So it's a fad diet. I know it's very popular right now. I urge you to think about what the human body actually needs in terms of nutrients and what kinds of foods provide that. And number one, the main rule is diversity, right? You want to eat a lot of different kinds of things. You know, they talk about eating the rainbow when you are eating vegetables, because different colors of vegetables have different nutrients. The same goes for just your general diet. And I am going to talk about what is a healthy diet in a minute after I bash some of these. But keto is not healthy. Next slide. Oh, yep. Yeah. So I'll just talk about some problems with keto. So the first thing that happens is what they call the keto flu. You start feeling tired and your body aches. Your body is trying to tell you something. Pain is a signal, and discomfort is a signal that something is wrong. This diet does not nourish your body. And so what ends up happening is you start getting really sluggish because you're not giving your body the food that it needs to build new cells. You start getting kidney stones because you're eating so many animal products usually that and dairy that you have an over processing of calcium, so much so that the body has to sock it in stones so that it can get rid of it. And then you also end up with vitamin and mineral deficiencies because you're not getting enough of the right foods. Yeah, let's move on.
Lily, we have another question. What about Nucific products, NUCIFIC, and the pros and the cons of those?
I don't know that line of products. I would have to look it up and then look at what is in the ingredients. I would say that if the ingredients are pronounceable and certified clean of pesticides and things like that, then it's probably better than not. But if you've got a lot of things where you don't know what that ingredient is, or it's really hard to pronounce, it's usually synthetic, and that's not food.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank-
Go ahead. No? Okay. Let's talk about a vegan diet. So there's a lot of folks out there who are on a vegan diet. And for those that don't know, vegans are vegetarians, but they also eliminate other types of animal-based food. So dairy and eggs and sometimes honey. You know, it purports to be cleaner and healthier and more ethical. But is that really true? Let's scroll to the next slide. So the problems with a vegan diet end up happening in the long term because you end up with some nutrient deficiencies. B12 and vitamin D and certain fatty acids and heme iron, they come from animal products. And so you need to supplement those. And again, when you supplement things, you don't want to take synthetic supplements. You want to take food sourced supplements. And if you know, B12 and heme iron only come from animal products, you're taking those nutrients that aren't readily absorbable by the body and recognized as food when you're taking vegan supplements. So, you know, I understand the draw of a vegan diet, and for the most part, like if people go on a vegan diet for a while, it is healthier than the typical American diet because Americans don't eat enough vegetables. They don't eat enough plant matter. Michael Pollan says, in terms of food advice, if you haven't read any Michael Pollan books, they're very amusing and wonderful about our food supply. He says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much, right? Perfect advice. You know, a plant-centered diet is super healthy, right? Making sure that half your plate is vegetable content, and then you know, break up the rest of the plate into complex carbohydrates, proteins, things like that. That's great. Vegan diets can be troublesome in the long term because of nutrient deficiencies. And, you know, while a vegan diet purports to be more ethical, it's hard to say. A typical American vegan diet, and you see vegan diets coming from affluent Western countries. They don't necessarily come from other places where, you know, they eat local foods. Number one, you're not necessarily eating local when you're eating vegan because you're importing quinoa from South America, where the indigenous people there that used to rely on quinoa can't get it anymore because most of it's being grown for American, you know, import. So you're relying on fossil fuels. You're trying to get a balanced diet by using sort of the global economy. And I don't know if that's more ethical, you know? It relies a lot on monoculture farming, particularly soy, you know, and that's not good for the environment either. So for me, it's kind of a toss-up. I know that commercial livestock farming is completely unethical and cruel. However, monoculture farming destroys the soil, and I think there are some alarming statistics about soil quality on Earth and how much it can continue to support us with the kind of agriculture systems that we currently have. So, next slide. There are other types of diets that are silly. The ones that look at pH. Oh, we need to, you know, have an alkaline diet. That's not how your body alkalinizes itself. That's not how it works. But I will say that most plants are alkaline. So if you're introducing more alkaline foods, you're probably eating a little healthier because you're eating a plant-centered diet, but it doesn't necessarily change the pH of your body. That's not how that works. Paleo is a made-up weird kind of diet. It's not ancestral. That's not how people ate. It's just silly. And fasting, there are lots of cultures that do fasting for short periods of time, and some chronic problems might benefit from some intermittent fasting. It is not something you should ever do in the long term. That's not how we're built as creatures. You're meant to intake food on the regular and process it and maintain. So if you're going to be doing fasting, work with someone who knows what they're doing. Yeah. Scroll.
Lily, we have a question. Does putting butter on veggies negate other benefits?
No, in fact, the reason we love creamy salad dressings on raw vegetables is it actually helps us assimilate those nutrients better. A little bit of fat on raw vegetables or steamed vegetables or whatever is great. And I'm never going to tell you not to eat fats because your body actually needs fats. That whole low fat craze was misguided because the problem really was refined sugars, not necessarily fats. So what is healthy? This is an outline of the Mediterranean diet, which I'm a fan of, and you know, it's a pyramid. So what that means is the vast majority of what you eat is down at the bottom, the bigger part of the pyramid. And so we're looking at non-refined cereals and products. So whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, brown rice, not refined, as the main part of your daily diet, followed by fruits and vegetables, followed by some olive oil, because you know they love their olive oil, fats, healthy fats, good for your brain, and then some dairy products, 2 servings of dairy a day, which a serving is actually a lot less than what Americans think it is. if you ask my 10-year-old what a serving of fruit is, he's going to come up with something that looks more what is technically 3 servings, right? That's just how it is. And then we get into weekly. So what I love about this pyramid is it helps you kind of figure out a meal plan, because I plan and then I shop, you know, in advance. And so you've got these daily things of what you're eating. And if you notice daily, it doesn't talk about a specific protein other than dairy. Weekly, you're mixing up fish, poultry, olives, pulses, and nuts, potatoes, eggs, and sweets each week, right? 3 servings of sweets a week. I have to say that I am guilty of overindulging, according to this pyramid, in sweets, as are most Americans. And then the very top is red meat, 4 servings a month. Pretty intense, right? Like most people eat way more than that. It also talks about physical activity every day. It talks about moderation, wine every day. Wine actually helps cut down some of the extra cholesterol that you're eating from that dairy. So this is a balanced, healthy diet. And so the people that follow this diet just as part of a regular thing in the Mediterranean area tend to have longer lives. We could also look at, but I don't have in the slideshow, a Japanese diet, which is very heavy on seafood, less on dairy, but lots of healthy fats and fermented foods. That's another thing that's not on here, is fermented foods, very healthy. Fermented vegetables in particular. So like when you're going with the cycle of the seasons, you know, you can get fresh fruit and vegetables in the warmer seasons, but then when it's winter, you know, hopefully you have put stuff by for the winter and you've got a lot of fermented vegetables to eat.
Lily, somebody had made a comment. I've switched primarily to cocoa, nut oil on most things, and organic. And then somebody has a question, and with the whole grains, we need to focus on organic in order to avoid glyphosate.
Glyphosate, yeah.
Thank you. And then they end that with correct.
Yeah, so when you are looking at organic, you're looking at plants that haven't been treated with the glyphosate. And so buying certified organic. So I'll share what I do. So I worry about flour, for example, because I love to bake. I worry about flour that I get at the supermarket, even if it's labeled as organic. They've done some testing and there's spread, right? Unless you know that the people that are making the flour have their own fields and it's kind of surrounded, you get drift, you get pesticide drift, you get glyphosate drift. So what I recently did was, you know, it's fall now, so the wheat has been harvested. I bought 10 pounds of all-purpose white organic non-GMO flour from Azure Standard. Azure Standard, you can get things by mail or you can join like a buying co-op if they have a hub in your area. I have mine shipped because I live in the middle of nowhere now. But they grow their own wheat and it's organic and non-GMO, and it has been a family farm enterprise. Like they started shipping these things and you get it in bulk and it comes wrapped in paper, so you're not like contributing to the plastics problem. But I really love getting stuff from Azure Standard. I also can get bulk beans and bulk nuts and dried fruits and things from them. And so that's what I did. I have a bulk order coming so that I can do all my holiday baking with good flour. Yeah. All right, let's talk about gut flora. Everybody's heard about probiotics. They're eating their yogurt, they're drinking their kombucha. So we now know that we are not a single organism, but we are a colony, and there are more of them than there are of us. And we rely on them to help regulate all kinds of body functions, not just digestion, but we're talking about gut health today. There are at least 10 to 15 strains of different kinds of beneficial bacteria in your gut. And genetically, you tend to have the strains that your ancestors did. Not all of them are complete, and so we inherit some problems, but the good news is that we are learning about these, and we can populate our gut with colonies of beneficial bacteria. When you're looking at probiotics to take to help populate your gut and restore an imbalance, I say go for at least 10 strains, more if you can find it, and at least 10 billion CFU, which is how we measure how much is in a dose. And that way you're getting a nice diversity of beneficial bacteria. You want to go with a reputable brand, one that you know sells quite a lot, so that you're not getting something that's been sitting on a shelf for days and days, years and years. And one thing that you probably aren't hearing from the supplement industry is that probiotics are fantastic to restore an imbalance. So if you had to take antibiotics, for example, or you had an illness that had diarrhea, you probably decimated that colony and you need to repopulate faster, that's when you take probiotics. However, you don't need to take them every day for the rest of your life, right? Your body should retain its colony if you haven't decimated it in some way. And that includes eating that glyphosate wheat. That decimates our colony. So if you're working on getting rid of that and you want to, make sure that your gut flora is well populated, take a probiotic for a while. But then after that, as long as you're not sick or taking antibiotics or gone for surgery, then you can just eat fermented foods to maintain your balance and introduce new critters into your system. We also have beneficial bacteria on our skin. So what we wash our bodies with and what products we put on will affect our microbiome on our skin. It's everywhere, and they help us. It's a symbiotic relationship. Next. Yeah, and then when you take a probiotic, make sure it has a prebiotic in there, which is food for the little critters who are populating your gut. The prebiotic is what the probiotics eat to get them started, to make sure that they don't die before they help you. But beneficial bacteria and yeast assist in all kinds of health, not just gut health, immune, endocrine, respiratory, nervous system. All of them rely on these beneficial creatures living in and on us.
So
Okay.
Lily, we have a question. What are some reputable brands?
Well, I've taken a bunch of different brands. Oh, here's something that I can give you as a resource. I have a dispensary online through a company called FullScript. If you go to my website and go to the footer of the website on any page, you can click it and be taken there. If you open an account, it's going to be deeply discounted professional grade supplements that you can buy probiotics, and you can actually click different criteria. Like I'm looking for 10 billion CFU. I'm looking for a vegan brand. I'm looking for something that has no cellulose. You can click all those boxes and find reputable professional grade supplements. And I make it so that my clients can use it for things that I don't make, like probiotics. And I believe it's like 20% off of retail. So because supplements get really expensive. I just do that as a public service. People can feel free to use that. Even if you don't become one of my clients, I just try to promote community health. So feel free to use that link that's on my website, lilykunning.com. And use it and find, you can also find multivitamins or any number of things on there, joint supplements, things like that.
And then somebody else made a comment that their doctor likes the acidophilus probiotics.
Yeah, so acidophilus is one strain of beneficial bacteria, just like lactobacillus is another. Acidophilus is great, but it's only one of a diverse set of bacteria that you want in your system. So feel free to take some acidophilus, get some other kinds of beneficial bacteria in your blend as well, and you'll see the benefits. We have another slide. Yeah, yay, there they are. We can move past that. It's just cute little illustrations. Yeah, and so, most people, when they first hear about probiotics, they're like, oh, well, I don't want bacteria in my gut. But here's the thing, the good guys that we want in our system will actually help to destroy the bad guys like E. coli or salmonella. So we do want them, and we want to have a healthy population so that they can take on anything that we may do to ourselves, like eating bad food. Yeah. Next slide.
Lily, could you address fiber? It was on an earlier slide and you didn't mention it. I couldn't read it.
Oh, sure. Basically, daily intake of fiber, which is usually through plant foods, is super important. It keeps everything moving properly through the digestive tract. If you have a problem with diarrhea or constipation, fiber is going to be your great normalizer. And so along with, making sure you're eating healthy, make sure that you are taking in fiber. And I recommend not doing a fiber supplement unless you have an acute problem where maybe your stools are so loose that you need to bind them up. But that would only be temporary. You usually get your fiber through your food. Yeah. So these are some fermented foods from around the world. I always have apple cider vinegar, raw, unpasteurized, with the mother, as they call it, in my home, and I use it for all kinds of things. I use it in my cooking. I make my own buttermilk because I don't buy buttermilk. I just acidify the milk when I need it, and then I have biscuit fodder. Yogurt and kefir are fermented dairy products, and sauerkraut and kimchi are fermented cabbage. Natto is fermented soybeans. I'm not a big fan of those because they're kind of slimy. Kvass, fermented beets and rye and barley. Miso, I use miso a lot. I love miso soup. And kombucha. I have a continuously producing SCOBY. A SCOBY is the little fermenting machine. It's a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. And so I have a gallon of kombucha fermenting on my counter at all times, and we just move it through the refrigerator. And my SCOBYs are very productive, so it only takes them a week to make a good double ferment kombucha. Next slide. So the gut affects all, and it impacts all in your body. The gut-brain axis. If you don't have a proper gut biome and you're not eating whole foods, it's going to affect your brain. You're going to have brain fog, possible anxiety and depression, executive functioning problems. And it has to do with your gut flora. So I highly recommend, if you haven't done it yet, going ahead and taking a month of probiotics and then just supplementing with fermented foods after that, and see how your nervous system functioning and your brain functioning improve. We often treat anxiety and depression as sort of separate from body illnesses, but studies show that they have physiological causes that can be ameliorated. When I went to acupuncture school, I was astonished at things that we only give to psychiatrists being treated with acupuncture in China. Things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and anxiety and depression. So I thought that was fascinating and amazing, and it really opened my eyes to the physiological causes of mental disorders. Yeah, let's move forward. Oh yeah, there's the Michael Pollan thing. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Michael Pollan is a great author, and if you're interested in food at all, I highly recommend any of his books. They're awesome. I think that might be the last slide. No, it's not. Bitter, forgot about that. So bitter therapy. So this tongue diagram is what I grew up with. It's actually not accurate. You have receptors all over your tongue for all the flavors. And they never put umami on there, and umami is definitely a flavor. But bitters, Americans avoid bitter flavor as much as possible, and that is to our detriment. We have bitter receptors on our tongue and throughout the entire digestive tract. We also have them in our lungs and in our brain. When they are stimulated through bitter flavor, like the receptors are like, oh, there's bitter, it actually stimulates proper functioning. So remember how I talked about, we're going to talk about bitter therapy for the gallbladder and the liver. You take bitters every day, or you eat bitter food or drink bitter drinks, because bitter is just a flavor, right? So you don't have to necessarily take a bitter supplement, but you could if you're learning how to make bitter foods. You need bitter every day, and those things get stimulated. So they're in our stomach, which is enzymes and acid. They're in our pancreas, which is enzymes and insulin. They're in our liver, the receptors, which is bile production. They're in the gallbladder, bile release. They're in the small intestine, nutrient absorption. They're everywhere. And when you regularly ingest bitter, everything's working, right? So I highly recommend anyone who has like slight digestive issues, or if they've had a history of these problems ongoing, to start taking bitters. And this is the one supplement that I can recommend to everyone daily, because they replace food we're not getting, right? And when I'm starting someone out who has an acute problem on bitter therapy, I make them take it every day, twice a day. Morning and evening, like 15 minutes before a meal, because it kind of primes the pump, gets those bitter receptors going, and then you can digest food optimally. Once you've had it in your system for a month, you could skip a day, you could skip a dose. It's not a big deal. Just regularly consume it a few times a week to keep everything on track. And I have a bottle of bitters in my dining room. That way I remember to take it before meals. Next slide. Yep, here's more on the taste receptors and how they work. And yeah, like I said, we have bitter receptors, not just in our digestive tract, but also in the brain and in the lungs. And we haven't quite figured out what kind of functioning they stimulate. But given the air quality in central Ohio, I think bitter therapy is a good idea to help strengthen the lungs. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. Next slide. Here we go. Look at all those bitter taste receptors. They're everywhere. Next slide. Yep, so these are just slides that show that PubMed, which is a database of medical studies that are published in like medical journals, we know that bitter receptors help with, this is upper airway immunity. So this is respiratory issues. I think the next one is on just general health and disease. And so it talks about immunity and it talks about fertility and how bitters help with all of it. It's amazing. And so I know that there's a lot of talk right now about probiotics, but bitter is definitely one of those things that needs to be studied more by science. Herbalists have known about it forever. Like we recommend bitters to our clients with digestive issues and endocrine issues, but these are some of the benefits of taking digestive bitters to relieve digestive issues. We know that these things work. It curbs sugar cravings, because bitter is kind of the opposite of sweet. And the more bitter you take in, the less you're going to crave sweet, which, you know, like I said, I take more than 3 a week, so I could definitely use more bitter. Yep, and here's another chart that shows where bitter receptors are. Even the vagus nerve, which has to do with, you know, executive brain function. So,
Lily, what would be some examples of bitters?
So there are bitter roots and bitter fruits. Hops is a very commonly known bitter. We use it to bitter beer, but you can take a tea of hops. Let's see, coffee is a bitter as long as you don't put sugar in it. Let's see, a lot of roots. When I make my bitter formula, I use yellow dock, burdock, and dandelion root. And then I add what we call carminatives in herbalism, which are things that help with like remedies for digestion, like gas and bloating and sour stomach and nausea. And those things are cinnamon and cardamom and orange peel in my formula, but other people can use fennel or chamomile is a carminative. There's lots. So my final recommendations: eating a whole food diet, not the store.
Lily, excuse me, before you get started with final recommendations, somebody shared in the chat, so beer is healthy, right?
Yes, in moderation. Yes, beer is healthy. Yeah, so my final recommendations are not the store whole foods, but literally eating whole foods like that Mediterranean diet or a Japanese diet. When you're imbalanced, taking a probiotic to get back to where you need to be, eating fermented foods and beverages regularly, taking a bitter tonic regularly, and of course, all the general things that help overall health and wellness, getting good sleep, moving around every day to maintain your metabolism and your circadian rhythms, and caring for your emotional health, because that's going to help your gut health too. I think we went over, did we?
Unfortunately, we did go over a little bit. We started a little late because of the recording. So I am going to end our recording after I say thank you so very much, Lily. We greatly appreciate you sharing all of this wonderful information.